All right, on this lesson, we're going to talk about the properties of rhombi. The plural for rhombus is rhombi or rhombuses. So a rhombus is one rhombus, and a rhombi is many rhombuses. And then we're going to throw in squares at the very end. All right, so a rhombus has all the properties of a parallelogram. It means it has those 6 properties, but it has 3 additional properties of its own. So let's take a look. Think of a rhombus, it's like a parallelogram, but it's got 4 congruent sides. So, or you could think of it like a square that's been tilted. It is got all 4 sides are congruent. So instead of just being across from each other, we know that all of them are congruent. So for this particular problem, I would be able to say that 2p plus 9 is equal to 3p minus 6, and I could set that equation and solve for p in this case. Okay, all 4 sides are congruent. All right, the second property is that the diagonals of a rhombus bisect all the interior angles. So here's your diagonal. It is cutting this angle in half, which means those are congruent, those are congruent, these are congruent to each other, and these are congruent to each other. We know because it's a parallelogram that the opposite angles are congruent, but now they're being cut in half, so the 2 halves are congruent to each other. So if this one's 80, this one's 80, this would be 80, that would be 80. And then we could figure out the others because we know if, well, you could do it a couple different ways, but one property of parallelogram is that consecutive angles are supplementary. So if we've got 160 degrees tied up with these 2 angles, that only leaves 180 minus 160. That only leaves 20 degrees for these 2 angles together, so that means each one of these must be 10. And if those are 10, these are 10. So here the diagonals of a rhombus are perpendicular. So that means when the diagonals cross each other, they make right angles. All right, so all of these are going to be right angles. So that gives us 4 right triangles. So now anything that we do because of right triangles, we can do with these parts of a rhombus. So if I needed to solve for this missing side, I could say, well, this on its own is a right triangle. The legs, 8 squared plus 15 squared equals, we'll call this c for now, c squared, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we've got 64 and 15 squared. That's 225 equals c squared. Add those together, you get 289, and then take their square root, and that gives you 17. So if this single side is 17, all 4 sides are congruent, so I just multiply that by 4, and I get a perimeter of 68. All right, I think we're going to skip this problem. Let's just move on. Squares have all the properties of a parallelogram and a rectangle and a rhombus. So they have all of the properties, but they don't have anything unique for themselves. So they carry every property. And there you go. That's a square. So let's see if we understand these markings. Opposite sides are congruent. All 4 sides are congruent. And that's parallelogram. That's a property of rhombus. Diagonals are perpendicular. That's also a rhombus property. Diagonals bisect each other. That is parallelogram. But then diagonals are congruent. That's from rectangle. Diagonals bisect opposite angles. That is rhombus. all the angles equal 90 degrees. That's from rectangle. And that's about all I see. Okay. So a square does it all. It has every property. All right. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.